up that he was paid to take this case with due gravity, and it was the jury's duty to take it seriously. That's just as well, because no one else will. The jury's verdict was a win, just about, for Andrew Neil, but the general verdict was that it was a hugely entertaining week full of smut and snobbery. The only important question that arose from the proceedings was not, what is fair comment, but who came out of it looking the silliest? Was it Andrew Neil? Damages of £1,000 and 60p for your employer is not exactly a resounding vindication of your reputation. When the judge was giving guidelines to the jury for the damages, he innocently asked,
should it be enough for him to enjoy a night out with friends at Tramp?
He then went on to wonder whether the sum should be enough for a holiday, or a car, or a boat, or an investment. Mr. Worsthorne's remark after the £1,000 was awarded was more in keeping with the general tenor of the case.
It would not even buy a man a weekend with Pamela Bordes.
Followers of the case now know that this cost £2,000, though they will also know that £1,000 would have got 2 quickies from the woman Mr. Neil described as
attractive, stylish and intelligent.
The scene in Tramp, where the fateful meeting occurred, was gone over in what was surely embarrassing detail for Neil. Whilst Neil was in the nightclub, urgently debating a vital national topic with Lady Rothermere, Pamela joined in. Says Neil,
I think she made some remarks about the political issue we were discussing.
Unfortunately, there's no record of them. But the conversation then turned to cooking, and this led to the mixer. Not a reference to how well Neil felt Pamela mixed with his important friends, but a reference to Moulinex.
I gave her a very romantic present, a Moulinex mixer to help her with the cooking.
This is not terribly romantic, and certainly not in the sense that Peregrine Worsthorne was described as a schoolboy at Stowe.
He used to dress up, trying to look the romantic with a cloak and a floppy hat.
This is the point where Worsthorne begins to look as silly as Neil, particularly when it was revealed that the pretty young Worsthorne used to meet the older boys, and
he took part in the conversation to show that he was more than a dumb blonde.
It sounds remarkably like Pamela. The most extraordinary thing is that Worsthorne wrote all of this himself in a book about public schoolboys, including the reminiscence that
he had been seduced by George Melly at the age of 15. It happened with incredible dispatch on the art-room sofa one afternoon.
This must have been confusing for a jury who had been told by Worsthorne that editors of Sunday papers, including presumably himself,
should conduct themselves in their private lives in a dignified, discreet and decorous way.
Having been unembarrassed by explicit underage homosexuality, Worsthorne found himself embarrassed by the female body. He said Pamela possessed
a very attractive frontal, whatever the correct word is.
His lawyer helped out with good bosom, and Worsthorne continued,
a good, a cleavage, a good, what's it called, embonpoint.
Worsthorne felt that the possessor of the embonpoint would have been more acceptable
had Mr. Neil met her at a vicarage tea party.
This level of pomposity repeatedly made Worsthorne look a bit of an embonpoint himself, particularly when he admitted using the F word on television in 1973, but was too shy to say it again in court. His barrister obliged.
The word had been fuck, had it not?
It was peculiarly appropriate somehow, since that's what it was all about, despite Worsthorne's lectures.
Editors of great newspapers should be homme sérieux.
One can't see Donald Trelford as an homme sérieux either. The Sun headline captured the editor of the Observer's involvement in typical style.
Dirty Don tried to pull my Pam by Randy Andy.
That's not the style of the Sunday Telegraph, or even the Observer, but it tells the story pretty clearly. Trelford's advances were rebuffed, according to Neil, but
he later formed some sort of association with her. I put it no higher than that.
Now Neil is being coy, which is a pity. A libel action brought by Trelford against Neil would keep the whole circus going. Trelford has not even sued Worsthorne, despite being described as a Playboy editor along with Neil. Neil said of Trelford,
unlike myself, he can't keep his trap shut.
That's not true now. Trelford's silence and refusal to issue a writ have kept him well below the 2 main contestants in the looking an idiot stakes. Pamela herself makes people look idiots, proper Charlies in Worsthornese, rather than inviting ridicule herself. She recently outdid Worsthorne on the Jonathan Ross show, not for saying the F word, but for delivering a long lecture on press ethics. She blamed them for harassing her, but it was clear from the trial that she'd started it all in Tramp by giving her telephone number to Neil. Having tried to reinvent herself as a celebrity, it was good to see the previous titles restored.
Bimbo, gold digger, call girl, prostitute.
The newspapers did look very stupid. The Times got an award of 60 pence, which everyone pointed out is the price of the Sunday Times. It's also the price of the Independent on Sunday, who must have been laughing themselves sick as their three main competitors washed their dirty laundry in public. The Telegraph ended up paying all the costs of the case, about £250,000. If they had paid money into court, a normal and sensible insurance precaution, the Times would have had to pay the lot, as the judge said.
If you had paid £1 into court, you could have had your costs.
This doesn't do the Telegraph's reputation for business acumen much good. It also emerged that Neil tried to hire Worsthorne for the Sunday Times, as the QC put it incredulously.
You were prepared to have a writer on the Sunday Times who behaved in the malicious way described?
What's more, the Sunday Times actually does now employ Walter Ellis, who wrote the second piece about Neil for the Sunday Telegraph. He deserves a short mention in the public humiliation contest.
Mr. Ellis was asked if he still regarded Mr. Neil as the faithful amanuensis of Rupert Murdoch, his proprietor.
Mr. Ellis, now of the Sunday Times, said,
"Most certainly not. I've completely revised my opinion."
I think the jury did not revise its opinion of the press very much. It stayed pretty low, as did the damages. After the lunacy of recent libel actions, these looked positively sane, and on this occasion the jury were not in the silly league at all. That leaves the judge, Justice Michael Davis, who I appear before far too often, other than to say how learned, balanced, just, fair, brilliant, erudite and magisterial he was. And a wag with it. Of Mrs. Bordes, as everyone keeps calling her, he asked,
"Sexy and voluptuous? I don't know. When I say I don't know, I know what I think, but I'm not going to say. It's entirely a matter for you."
Well, the barristers laughed anyway. The verdict of derisory damages was encouraging, but what about who deserved the most derision? Neil? Worsthorne? Trelford? The libel laws? The legal system? All of them? As the judge put it, I know what I think, but it's entirely a matter for you.
Ian Hislop.